The Dominion of Thexmar had perfected the art of diplomatic violence with all the subtlety of a supernova in a library. For 800 years, their trial by superior violence had settled disputes across 12 sectors with brutal efficiency. Why waste time with tedious negotiations when you could simply beat the opposition into submission? It was elegant, really, in the way that natural disasters were elegant, devastating, inevitable, and oddly satisfying to watch from a safe distance. Their current champion made the concept of safe distance a relative term that extended roughly to the next solar system. Kral'vax the Bone-Crusher stood 12 feet of weaponized nightmare, bred on a world where the gravity crushed ambition and the atmosphere corroded hope. His species, the Thexmari, had evolved past the need for external weapons. When your fists could punch through starship hulls and your hide could deflect plasma bolts, why complicate things with tools? The arena where these diplomatic discussions took place floated in the void between two dying stars, a crystalline sphere the size of a small moon where civilizations came to watch their futures get decided by whoever could hit harder. The Thexmari had built it as a monument to their philosophy: might makes right, violence solves everything. And if you disagree, they had a 12-foot walking disaster who would be happy to discuss the matter with your face. Today's entertainment featured humanity's latest disagreement with the Dominion, a small matter of trade routes through the Kepler Nebula. The humans had been using these routes for 60 years, but the Thexmari had recently decided they wanted them. International law, prior agreements, and basic fairness were all very nice concepts, but Kral'vax's 47 consecutive victories in the arena carried considerably more legal weight. What made today's bout particularly amusing was humanity's choice of champion. The Dominion had expected Earth's finest warrior, perhaps a genetically enhanced super soldier, or at least someone who knew which end of a weapon pointed at the enemy. Instead, they'd sent Vera Kensington, a salvage operator from the asteroid belt who'd apparently been selected through the time-honored human tradition of drawing straws. Vera had spent the last 15 years picking through the wreckage of dead starships in zero gravity, extracting valuable components from vessels that had met unfortunate ends. She was small even by human standards, all wiry muscle and calloused hands, with the sort of practical competence that came from making a living in an environment that killed you for minor mistakes. The Galactic betting pools had responded to her selection with the kind of odds usually reserved for natural phenomena, somewhere between impossible and mathematically theoretical. The woman herself seemed remarkably unconcerned about these calculations. While other species champions spent their pre-fight time in meditation or ritualistic preparation, Vera floated around the arena's observation deck in her patched salvage suit, studying the crystalline structure with the professional interest of someone evaluating a potential demolition project. Fascinating construction, she muttered to herself, running a scanner over the arena's artificial gravity generators. Quantum manipulation field, probably Class 7 emitters. Must draw incredible power to maintain standard gravity across this volume. She made notes on a battered datapad with the same attention to detail she'd shown when cataloging the salvageable components of a destroyed freighter. The Thexmari delegation found this behavior deeply unsettling. Their warriors prepared for combat by entering a battle trance and consuming ritual stimulants that would have killed most other species. Humans, apparently, treated gladiatorial combat like a particularly violent salvage operation. Kral'vax himself observed these preparations with the bored expression of someone watching paint dry on a particularly tedious planet. Humans were fragile, he knew. Soft creatures who broke easily and made satisfying crunching sounds when properly compressed. This would be over quickly, another brief entertainment, before he returned to his training regimen. The arena filled with spectators as the appointed time approached. Andromedans shifted nervously in their environmental suits, their collective consciousness struggling to understand the concept of individual violence. Rigelian merchants chitted excitedly about the betting opportunities. The Centauran diplomatic corps maintained their usual expression of superior disapproval, though they'd still bought premium tickets to watch the bloodshed. When the ceremonial bells chimed across 17 different cultural frequencies, both combatants entered through opposite airlocks. Kral'vax strode into the arena like a natural disaster with anger management issues, each step causing the crystalline floor to vibrate ominously. His hide gleamed with bioluminescent threat displays that had evolved to paralyze prey animals, while his forearms ended in claws capable of shredding battle armor. Vera drifted in through her airlock with the casual grace of someone who'd spent half a life in zero gravity, even though the arena's artificial gravity should have made such movement impossible. She'd apparently modified her salvage suit's maneuvering thrusters for atmospheric use, giving her an odd floating gait that looked like she was perpetually falling upward. Citizens of the galaxy, announced the arena's AI with a sort of forced enthusiasm usually reserved for product demonstrations. Today's trial will determine control of the Kepler Nebula trade routes. Representing the Dominion of Thexma, weighing in at 643 kilograms of crystallized violence, the Bone-Crusher, the Fleet Killer, the diplomatically persuasive, Kral'vax. The crowd erupted in approval. Kral'vax raised all four arms in acknowledgement, his translator broadcasting his traditional pre-combat declaration, "I shall grind my enemies to paste and use their remains to fertilize my victory garden." And representing humanity, the AI continued with noticeably less enthusiasm, weighing in at 58 kilograms of what we can only assume is misplaced optimism, Vera Kensington, whose primary qualification appears to be an intimate knowledge of how things fall apart in space. Vera waved absently at the crowd, though her attention seemed focused on the arena's structural elements. She was studying the gravity generator placement with the sort of intensity most fighters reserved for their opponents' weaknesses. The rules were elegantly simple: fight until someone couldn't continue. No external weapons, though personal equipment was permitted. No outside assistance, though screaming encouragement from the stands was traditional. The winner species got the trade routes. The loser species got to explain to their people why they'd just lost a significant chunk of their economy to superior violence. When the starting klaxon sounded, Kral'vax immediately demonstrated why the Thexmari had dominated galactic politics for 8 centuries. He moved with shocking speed for something his size, crossing the arena in 4 massive bounds. His first attack was a classic Thexmari haymaker that could have punched through a battleship's hull. Vera, displaying either incredible reflexes or incredible luck, activated her suit's thrusters at the last possible moment. The maneuver sent her sliding sideways along the arena floor in a move that looked more like a controlled crash than a combat technique. Kral'vax's punch missed her by centimeters and instead connected with the arena wall, which promptly developed a crater that would have housed a small city. The crowd cheered appreciatively. This was exactly the sort of overwhelming dominance they'd expected, even if the humans' evasion methods seemed more accidental than skillful. What followed was less a fight than an extended demonstration of the futility of human ambition. Kral'vax pursued Vera around the arena with methodical precision, each attack coming closer to connecting. She dodged, rolled, and occasionally launched herself through the air using her suit's thrusters, but her movements were clearly those of someone trying to avoid being pulverized rather than mount any sort of offensive. "Run all you like, scavenger," Kral'vax rumbled, his voice carrying easily across the arena's acoustically perfect interior. "Your species excels at fleeing from superior predators. It will not save you here." Vera didn't bother responding. She was too busy not getting turned into component particles. But observers with particularly keen eyes might have noticed something odd about her retreat pattern. She wasn't running randomly. Instead, she seemed to be leading Kral'vax in a very specific path, always keeping certain structural elements between them, always positioning herself near the arena's gravity generator arrays. The crowd grew restless as the chase continued. They'd paid good money for spectacular violence, not an extended game of 3-dimensional tag. Even the Thexmari delegation began to mutter among themselves. Surely their champion could catch one small human. That's when Kral'vax decided to end the entertainment. He planted himself in the center of the arena and began to glow with internal energy, a sign that he was preparing his signature technique, the stellar collapse. It was an attack that channeled a Thexmari warrior's full power into a single devastating blow, capable of creating localized gravity wells and turning opponents into very thin paste. "Enough games," he declared, his voice now carrying the harmonic resonance of someone about to commit high-quality violence. "Face me and die with what little honor your pathetic species possesses." Vera, who had been examining one of the arena's gravity generator housings with professional interest, finally turned to face him directly. For the first time since entering the arena, she looked at her opponent with the sort of calculating expression she usually reserved for particularly valuable salvage. "You know what?" she said, pulling a small device from her tool belt. "You're absolutely right. Let's finish this. She walked toward him with steady, measured steps, though her movement still carried that odd zero-gravity grace that seemed to ignore the arena's artificial gravity. The crowd held its breath, perhaps expecting some dramatic last stand or heroic speech about human determination. Instead, Vera stopped just outside Kral'vax's reach and did something that would be discussed in xenopsychology classes for generations. She smiled. It was the smile of someone who had just figured out exactly how to salvage the most valuable components from a very large, very expensive piece of equipment. Kral'vax launched himself forward, the stellar collapse building to critical levels. The attack came with the force of a collapsing star, aimed directly at the spot where Vera stood with that infuriating expression. It was beautiful in its way, 8 centuries of combat tradition and crystallized fury focused into one perfect moment of diplomatic violence. The blow connected. The impact sent shockwaves through the arena structure, causing spectators to grab their seats and question their insurance policies. Energy discharges overloaded several of the arena systems, filling the air with ozone and the smell of overheated electronics. When the chaos cleared, Vera lay crumpled against the far wall, clearly unconscious and quite possibly dead. Kral'vax stood in the center of a perfectly circular crater, his massive form still glowing with residual energy. The crowd erupted in celebration. This was exactly the sort of decisive victory they'd expected, swift, brutal, and thoroughly satisfying to anyone who enjoyed watching smaller things get pulverized by larger things. The Bone-Crusher raised all 4 arms in triumph, already composing the victory speech he would broadcast across human space. Another challenger crushed, another species reminded of their place in the cosmic hierarchy. Perhaps he would be magnanimous, allow the humans to keep a small percentage of their trade routes in exchange for providing such brief entertainment. He was so busy savoring his anticipated glory that he almost missed the sound. Click. It was a small sound, barely audible over the crowd's celebration. But Kral'vax had been bred for combat, his senses honed to detect the slightest irregularity that might indicate treachery or hidden weapons. Click. He looked around, confused. The arena appeared exactly as it should after his devastating attack, damaged but structurally sound, with his opponent properly defeated against the far wall. Everything was as it should be. Click. That's when he noticed the small device Vera had been holding, now lying in the crater at his feet. It looked like a standard salvage scanner, the sort of tool used to identify valuable components in spacecraft wreckage. But something was wrong with its display. Instead of showing material compositions, it was counting down from 10. 9. Understanding hit Kral'vax with roughly the same force as his own stellar collapse. The scanner. The way she'd been studying the arena's structure. The specific pattern of her retreat, always staying near the gravity generators. She hadn't been running from him. She'd been mapping the arena's systems. 8. The device in the crater wasn't a scanner. It was a feedback modulator, designed to overload the quantum containment fields that kept the arena's artificial gravity stable. Vera had spent her career salvaging wreck ships, which meant she understood exactly how complex systems failed when their safety protocols were compromised. 7. Kral'vax tried to move, but the gravity well created by his own attack was still dissipating, holding him in place with the inexorable force of physics. He could only watch as the countdown continued, marking the seconds until the arena's gravity generators experienced what salvage operators called a cascading field collapse. 6. The Thexmarie in the audience began to understand what was happening. Emergency alarms started blaring as the arena's AI detected massive irregularities in the gravity control systems. But the safety protocols that might have prevented disaster had been designed to handle equipment failures, not deliberate sabotage by someone who understood the technology better than its builders. 5. Vera stirred against the wall, apparently not as unconscious as she'd appeared. Her salvage suit had absorbed most of the impact, and she positioned herself near one of the few areas where the arena structure would provide maximum protection from what was about to happen. 4. The gravity generators began to resonate with harmonic frequencies that made the crystalline arena ring like a bell. Spectators in the stands started floating as local gravity fields fluctuated wildly. The Andromedans, experiencing individual panic for the first time in their collective existence, began screaming in 17 different dimensional frequencies. 3. Kral'vax finally understood the full scope of what was happening. The human hadn't been trying to defeat him in combat. She'd been turning the entire arena into a weapon. His devastating attack had provided the perfect cover for her sabotage, creating enough chaos and energy discharge to mask the activation of her device. 2. Clever girl, he rumbled, his voice carrying a note of genuine respect even as the arena's gravity began to collapse around him. 1. The quantum containment fields that maintained the arena's artificial gravity didn't simply fail, they inverted. Instead of creating a stable gravitational environment, they began generating a series of cascading gravity wells that pulled in random directions with the force of neutron stars. The crystalline structure, designed to withstand impacts and energy discharges, had never been built to handle gravitational forces that change direction 17 times per second. Kral'vax, caught in the center of the chaos, found himself experiencing what it felt like to be simultaneously pulled toward the floor, the ceiling, and 3 different walls. His massive frame, so perfectly adapted for high-gravity combat, became a liability when gravity itself lost all sense of direction. The arena's emergency systems activated, flooding the structure with stabilization fields and rescue drones. But by the time the gravitational anomalies were contained, Kral'vax had been thoroughly redistributed across several different surfaces of the arena, unconscious and experiencing what his species would later describe as extreme directional confusion. Vera picked herself up from her protective position, checking her suit's integrity with the professional competence of someone who'd survived worse accidents in asteroid fields. The arena's gravity was slowly returning to normal, though several sections were still experiencing what the AI apologetically described as minor gravitational inconsistencies. Feedback cascade in the quantum containment matrix, she explained to the stunned crowd, consulting her datapad with the same attention to detail she'd shown throughout the fight. When you overload the primary stabilizers during a high-energy event, the backup systems try to compensate by inverting the field polarity. Creates a resonance cascade that turns the whole facility into a gravity blender. She looked around at the chaos she'd created, unconscious spectators floating in mid-air, structural damage that would take months to repair, and one very confused Thexmery champion who was slowly sliding down the wall in a manner that suggested his inner ear had given up trying to determine which way was up. Salvage work teaches you how things break, she added helpfully. And if you know how something breaks, you usually know how to make it break on purpose. The silence that followed was broken only by the arena's emergency systems trying to restore normal operations, and the occasional groan from Kral'vax as he attempted to remember which direction constituted standing up. The Thexmery delegation was already in panicked consultation with their technical advisors. Technically, their champion had not been defeated in combat. He'd been incapacitated by what could only be described as an environmental hazard created through malicious use of salvage equipment. The rules were unclear on whether this constituted victory, defeat, or simply very aggressive interior redecorating. Vera, meanwhile, was conducting a post-incident analysis of the arena's damage with the same methodical approach she brought to evaluating a derelict freighter. Occasionally she would nod to herself or make notes like gravitational shear exceeded design parameters or definitely need bigger containment fields for next time. The human delegation, who had been updating their wills and composing obituaries, found themselves instead celebrating an impossible victory. Vera had not only won the trade routes, she demonstrated that humanity's approach to problem-solving involved a delightful disregard for conventional combat tactics and an alarming competence with industrial sabotage. News of the victory spread across human space at faster-than-light speeds, carried by quantum communicators and old-fashioned bragging. Salvage operators throughout the galaxy raised their glasses in salute, finally receiving recognition for their unique skill set. Granted, that recognition came through interstellar diplomacy and spectacular property damage, but they take what they could get. The Thexmery Dominion, meanwhile, was forced to reconsider their approach to diplomatic violence. Perhaps there was something to be said for traditional negotiation, especially when dealing with species that treated complex technical systems as potential weapons of mass destruction. Kral'vax, once the medical teams had convinced his brain which way gravity was supposed to work, announced his retirement from arena combat. He would instead pursue a career in equipment safety inspection, reasoning that if humans could turn gravity generators into weapons, someone needed to make sure the galaxy's infrastructure was properly secured against creative misuse. The arena itself required 6 months of repairs and a complete overhaul of its safety protocols. The management eventually installed a memorial plaque commemorating the first time anyone had ever weaponized the venue itself, though they struggled with appropriate wording. Here, the plaque read, "Humanity demonstrated that the difference between salvage work and combat engineering is primarily a matter of what you're trying to accomplish and how much collateral damage you're willing to accept." Vera returned to the asteroid belt to resume her salvage operations, though she now found herself fielding offers from every military contractor in known space. She turned them all down, explaining that she had perfectly good work already and didn't need the excitement of people trying to kill her on purpose. The galaxy learned several important lessons that day, though different species drew different conclusions. The Thexmari learned humility and the importance of equipment maintenance. The humans learned that their salvage operators were apparently terrifying. The arena management learned to include sabotage by technical expertise in their insurance policies. But perhaps the most important lesson was this. In a universe filled with warriors bred for combat and weapons designed for destruction, sometimes the most dangerous person in the room was the one who understood how everything was supposed to work. Because if you knew how something was supposed to work, you probably knew exactly how to make it stop working in the most spectacular way possible. And humans, as the galaxy was rapidly discovering, had a disturbing tendency to understand how things worked. They had an even more disturbing tendency to get creative when those things weren't working the way they wanted them to. The sting of Kral'vax's blow had indeed echoed through the arena, but it was Vera's counterstrike, calculated, precise, and utterly devastating to everything except her target, that ended it all. Not with superior strength or advanced weapons, but with the sort of practical technical knowledge that turned everyday tools into instruments of diplomatic revolution. Somewhere in the void between two dying stars, the universe continued its ancient dance, blissfully unaware that one small human with a tool belt full of salvage equipment had just redefined the meaning of creative problem-solving. And in the asteroid belt, work resumed with typical human efficiency. Because after all, there were ships to salvage and components to extract, and the galaxy's wrecked infrastructure wasn't going to repair itself. The universe would never look at salvage operators quite the same way again.